She was married to one of history's most feared dictators. He controlled armies, governments, and entire nations. But inside his own home, he was afraid of his wife. And she wasn't just difficult to live with. She was keeping a secret that would have destroyed everything. Her name was Rachele Mussolini, and almost nobody talks about her. Most people know the story of Benito Mussolini, the swagger, the speeches, the rise and catastrophic fall. But behind every carefully staged public moment, there was a woman standing in the shadows. A woman who grew up with nothing, who worked with her bare hands from the time she could walk, who married the most powerful man in Italy, and then did something he never expected. She betrayed him first. Predappio, Italy, 1890. A small stone village, tucked into the hills of northern Italy. No electricity, no running water, no future, at least not for most of the people born there. On April 11th of that year, a girl named Rachele Guidi was born into a family that had almost nothing. She was the youngest of 7 children. Her father worked the land, her mother worked the home, and by the time Rachele could walk, she was already working too. At 5 years old, she carried water from the fountain balanced on her head. Not as a game, as a job. By the time she was a teenager, she had already learned the most important lesson of her life. Nobody was coming to save her. If she wanted something, she had to fight for it herself. Then her father died. In 1902, Agostino Guidi passed away and left the family with nothing. Rachele was 12 years old. Her mother, Anna, packed up what little they had and moved the family to the nearby city of Forlì. Rachele went to work as a maid for wealthy families, cleaning their homes, serving their meals, living in their shadows. But something was about to change. Because in Forlì, there was a young man who had just returned from Switzerland. He was loud, ambitious, and impossible to ignore. His name was Benito Mussolini, and he had already noticed Rachele. Here is where the story gets complicated. Rachele's mother, Anna, had started a relationship with Benito's father, Alessandro Mussolini, shortly after both of their spouses were out of the picture. Some historians believe the relationship started even earlier, while Rachele's husband was still alive. That detail matters, because it means Rachele and Benito may have shared the same father. Nobody has ever been able to prove it, but nobody has ever been able to fully dismiss it either. And yet, despite that shadow hanging over them, the relationship between Rachele and Benito moved forward anyway. Their parents disapproved, strongly. So Benito did what any reasonable young man would do in that situation. He pulled out a revolver. In 1909, Mussolini walked into the room where his father and Rachele's mother were sitting and pointed the gun directly at them. His message was simple. Either they agreed to the relationship, or he would shoot Rachele and then himself. It worked. By 1910, Rachele had moved in with Benito. Their first child, a daughter named Edda, was born in September of that year. They weren't married yet, which meant Edda was considered illegitimate. 2 more children followed, Vittorio, then Bruno, and still no wedding. When Mussolini finally married Rachele in December 1915, there was already another problem, a serious one. He had already been married to someone else. Her name was Ida Dalzer. She had a son with him, and she had no idea what was coming. Mussolini's government later destroyed all records of that first marriage. Ida Dalzer spent the rest of her life fighting to prove it existed. She died in a psychiatric institution. Rachele never spoke about Ida publicly, not once. October 30th, 1922. Benito Mussolini comes to power in Italy. Fascist supporters march on Rome and force the government to hand him authority. Within months, he has dismantled democratic opposition, taken control of the press, and begun building one of Europe's most aggressive dictatorships. Italy has a new ruler. And his wife is still in Milan, feeding the chickens. That was Rachele. While Mussolini moved into the grand halls of Roman power, she stayed behind with the children. She walked them to school every morning. She bargained with market vendors for the best prices on vegetables. She managed the household with a single servant and the same practical hands that had carried water on her head at 5 years old. She had no interest in politics, no interest in banquets or ceremonies or the performance of power. She still spoke to her husband in the thick rural dialect they had both grown up with. She spoke no foreign languages. She attended none of the official state dinners. When she finally moved to Rome in 1929, the family was given the grand Villa Torlonia, a sweeping estate fit for a head of state. Rachele moved into the gatekeeper's lodge at the entrance. People called her Donna Rachele, a title of respect. She accepted it. But she never let it change her. She was still the girl from Predappio, still practical, still tough, still watching everything with those sharp, unforgiving eyes. And she was watching her husband very carefully. Because Benito Mussolini had a problem. Several of them, actually. And they all had women's names. Mussolini's personal driver kept a diary. His name was Ercole Borato, and he spent years behind the wheel watching his employer do things that would have ended careers, marriages, and reputations. The diary he left behind is detailed, uncomfortably so. According to Borato, Mussolini would regularly order him to stop the car mid-drive, not for meetings, not for state business, but because he had spotted a woman walking on the street and wanted to follow her. At one point, Mussolini claimed to have had 14 lovers at the same time. He described taking 3 or 4 women in a single evening. He had a beach resort called Castel Porziana where he would retreat regularly, not to rest, but to pursue his extramarital affairs without interruption. He treated it like a second job. And Rachele knew. She always knew. She once told a reporter, "My husband had a fascination for women. They all wanted him. Sometimes he showed me their letters, from women who wanted to sleep with him or have a baby with him. It always made me laugh." But Borato's diary tells a different story. One night, Mussolini came home late. Rachele was waiting for him. What followed was not laughter. It was a full confrontation. Shouting, accusations, years of swallowed anger finally breaking through. She was not as unbothered as she wanted people to believe. But here is the part nobody expected. The part that changes everything. While Rachele was quietly enduring her husband's endless parade of mistresses, she was seeing someone else. 1923. Mussolini is in Rome, building his empire. Rachele is in Milan, raising their children. And somewhere near Forlì, the family's country home, she meets a man. He is the cousin of a local station master. An ordinary man, nothing like her husband. No power, no ambition, no army behind him. And maybe that was exactly the point. Their affair lasted for several years. Rachele told nobody, kept it buried beneath the routines of motherhood and household management and market bargaining. She carried this secret the same way she carried everything else. Quietly, practically, without drama. But secrets in close families rarely stay secrets. By the time she was 15 years old, their daughter Edda already knew about her father's affairs. She had grown up watching women orbit her father like planets around a sun. She had accepted it, or at least learned to live with it. But when she discovered her mother's secret, she was furious. In a recorded interview in 1995, shortly before her own death, Edda described the moment she confronted Rachele. Her mother admitted everything, didn't deny it, didn't apologize, simply confirmed it was true, and explained herself in the most Rachele way possible. She told Benito herself. Rachele walked up to her husband, one of the most powerful men in the world at that point, and told him she had found someone who truly cared for her. Mussolini's reaction was not what anyone expected. He was reportedly stunned. But he did not end the relationship, did not forbid it, did not punish her. He said nothing. It was Edda who drew the line. She told her mother, that if the affair continued, she would demand to be sent away to boarding school. That threat, from her daughter, not her husband, was the thing that finally made Rachele end it. Think about that for a moment. The most feared dictator in Italy could not control his own wife. His 15-year-old daughter could. Edda had a name for her mother, not Donna Rachele, not the dictator's wife. She called her the real dictator of the house, and she meant it. Rachele had a temper that people around her learned to respect and fear. Mussolini himself, who sent men to prison and ordered executions without visible emotion, reportedly handled his wife with extreme care. He indulged her, avoided pushing her too far, walked carefully around her moods. There is one story that captures this perfectly. Over the years, Mussolini had received hundreds of official gifts: gold and silver plaques, medals, cups, ceremonial objects given to him by governments, dignitaries, and heads of state. They were stored throughout the home, taking up space. Rachele looked at them the way a peasant woman looks at anything impractical. They were clutter, so she had them melted down. She took the gold and silver and converted them into something she actually needed: a new kitchen stove. When Mussolini found out, he exploded. He told her she had stolen from the state, that those items had not been given to him as a man. They had been given to the head of government. They were not hers to touch. It was one of the only times he ever truly lost his temper with her. Her response is not recorded, but the stove stayed. This was the woman who ran Benito Mussolini's household, practical to the point of recklessness, fearless in ways that had nothing to do with power or politics. She simply did not bend. And when the worst moment of the family's life arrived, she did not bend then either. By 1943, the war was turning. Allied forces had landed in Sicily. The fascist Grand Council, the very body that had helped Mussolini consolidate power, turned against him. They voted to strip him of his authority. And among those who cast a vote against him was his own son-in-law. Galeazzo Ciano had served as Mussolini's foreign minister for years. He was married to Edda. He had sat at the family dinner table. He had watched his children grow up in the shadow of their grandfather's regime. And then he voted to remove that grandfather from power. When the Germans rescued Mussolini and set him up as head of a puppet state in northern Italy, Adolf Hitler made his expectations clear. He wanted revenge. Ciano was arrested, charged with treason, put on trial in the city of Verona. Edda fought desperately to save her husband. She carried documents, sensitive intelligence files that Ciano had collected over years, and threatened to release them if he was executed. She begged, she pleaded, she went to anyone who would listen. She went to her mother. Rachele refused. She not only refused to help, she actively pushed for severity. Every evening, for weeks, she met with Guido Buffarini Guidi, the Minister of the Interior of the puppet state. She urged him to maintain strict order, to show no weakness, to let the trial proceed. Her own daughter's husband, the father of her grandchildren. She did not move. On January 11, 1944, Galeazzo Ciano was executed by firing squad. After that day, Edda never spoke to her father again. The relationship between mother and daughter, already complicated by years of secrets and confrontations, fractured in ways that never fully healed. Rachele had made her choice. Family loyalty had limits. And in her mind, betrayal had consequences. April 28, 1945. Italian partisans catch up with Benito Mussolini near Lake Como. He is trying to flee. He is shot. His body is taken to Milan and hung upside down from the roof of a gas station for the crowd to see. Beside him, hanging in the same position, is Clara Petacci, his mistress, the woman who had stayed with him until the very end. Rachele is not there. She is not in Milan. She is not with him when he dies. She is not with the woman who chose to die beside him. She finds out the way most people did. Through the chaos of those final collapsing days of the war. 8 days later, the war in Europe ends. And Rachele Mussolini, the girl from Predappio who carried water on her head at 5 years old, is left to figure out what comes next. The Italian government sends her into exile on the island of Ischia, off the coast of Naples. She stays there for over a decade. No power, no villa, no staff, just a small island, and the kind of quiet that follows the end of everything. She returns in 1958, goes back to Predappio, opens a small farm, then a restaurant. The restaurant becomes popular. Tourists come. Curiosity seekers come. Neo-fascists make pilgrimages. She serves them food and says very little. She keeps her opinions close, the way she always has. But when reporters come, and they always come, she gives them just enough. Someone asks her about Clara Petacci. Her eyes flash. They did well to shoot her. She fought the Italian government for years to recover her husband's body. She won. She arranged a Christian burial in the Predappio cemetery. She pushed for the return of a piece of Mussolini's brain that had been taken to the United States after the war, as a medical specimen. The government sent it back. She recovered his personal belongings. Most of them were returned. But there was one item she refused: a large walnut bed, part of a set of furniture the government offered to give back. She turned it down without hesitation. Clara Petacci used it. Even in death, even decades later, that was the line. Everything could be forgiven, absorbed, endured. Everything except that. Rachele Mussolini died on October 30th, 1979, in Forlì, Italy. She was 89 years old. She had outlasted her husband by 34 years. She had outlasted the regime, the war, the exile, the humiliation, and the judgment of history. She had outlasted almost everyone who had played a role in the story she was part of. The question historians still wrestle with is a simple one. Who was she, really? Was she a victim? A woman trapped by circumstance, by poverty, by a man who took what he wanted and left her to manage the wreckage? Or was she something harder to categorize? A woman who made her own choices, including choices that shocked even those closest to her, and then stood by them without apology. She endured decades of public humiliation through her husband's affairs. She had her own affair and ended it on her own terms. She watched her son-in-law walk toward a firing squad and did not flinch. She kept her husband's memory alive long after the world had moved on and condemned him. She was not soft. She was not simple. She was not the quiet peasant woman she often appeared to be. And that rumor, the one about her possibly sharing a father with the man she married, was never proven. But it was never fully put to rest either. It sits in the historical record like a splinter, uncomfortable, unresolved. What is clear is this. In a story full of powerful men making enormous decisions that shaped the course of a nation, the most unbreakable person in the room was a woman who grew up carrying water on her head and never forgot where she came from. She didn't need a title. She didn't need a uniform. She didn't need an army. She just needed to be the last one standing. And she was.